You know, somebody said, when you talk about home, what comes to mind? Warm, okay. Peace, warm. Okay. Dinner? Yeah, actually. So, you know, that touches on some of the things that I've already got in here. People's ideas of home include some of these following, and I've got 5 differences that came to mind as I thought about this. This list isn't in order of importance, since how important each of these aspects is varies between individuals. And I'm not going to claim this is a complete list, of course, but actually there's actually 6. When we talk about home, we often mean a place. There's a specific location, whether it's a house, a city, or especially in science fiction, a planet. But there's a lot more than a set of coordinates or an area on a map involved here. Calling a place home involves relationships. Those relationships may include certain specific people, family members, friends, colleagues. They may include broad relationships with a local culture or subculture. And you've heard the phrase, that's not the way we do things at home. Or relationships with the local environment, flora, fauna, or even geology and climate. Around here, we have the nice local phrase, the mountain is out. Well, Seattleites all know instantly what that means, and people who've never been to Seattle have no clue what we're talking about. Another is the idea of stability or reliability. Generally, you expect home to remain essentially the same, at least on a short-term or small-scale basis. If I go to work all day, I expect to return home at the end of the day, and it'll be in the same place with the same people, the same decorations, furniture, and amenities, or lack thereof. In the Campbell's archetypal hero's journey, which you've probably all heard about, the whole thing begins with the hero leaving home, and then they do all the adventures in the big cycle, and they return home. I mean, you look at the Odyssey is entirely about the hero who's been away trying to get home. And this takes however many 100 or 1,000 verses there are in the Odyssey. Of course, the hero has changed during this journey, and home may have changed as well. Again, in the Odyssey, he comes on and finds out, yeah, a lot of the same people are there, but the situation is very different, and something has to be done about it. And actually, the same thing happens in Lord of the Rings, where the hobbits come home to the Shire and find out most of the same people are there, but the situation is very different, and something has to be done to fix it. But it's still home for them. And even in stories where a new home must be established, something essential about the place of origin evokes a sense of return. I could take some time to talk about the European American experience in this regard. Is that, I mean, we look at our own, talking about our own backgrounds. I'll say, well, I'm Scottish in descent. Well, yeah, that's true. I have Scottish blood in me, but the last Scotsman in my line, as far as I know, was the guys who came over in 1750. It's like, yeah, I would no more be at home in Scotland than I would be in Tibet. I mean, come on. As a third one, linked to the idea of stability is a feeling of safety. When we're home, we often feel a sense of protection, or we certainly want to. To be sure, in this fallen world, safety can be an ephemeral thing, as all these aspects are. And of course, that includes sometimes what we think of as home can be a pretty bad place. I'm talking about ideals, aspirations, in a sense, archetypes of what home means to people. And that's the safety here talks about Generally refers to at least some protection from the elements, like the warmth that was mentioned, as well as from random intrusion or violence. The reaction people have to a home invasion, is gut level and instinctive, and often even more extreme than the actual situation would suggest. And something, even if you're not there at the time, you come home and you see your house has been broken into, that's going to get a reaction from you because that's a violation of what home is supposed to be. And the safety also includes to material goods as a general rule. Again, that sense of somebody broke into my home and took some of my stuff. That's a violation. I even go, I think of the paraphrase, the Tick. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tick. He's sort of a superhero satire common character. They did comics, they did a live TV, they did a cartoon TV series. They're all hilarious, highly recommended. But one of the things he comments to one of the supervillains is, "You can't destroy the earth. That's where I keep all my stuff." Building on these concepts, you go to familiarity and comfort. It's kind of an intersection of stability and safety, but there's an additional layer on that. Ideally, home is where you can let your guard down, relax, not worry about meeting public expectations, and indulge your personal preferences and entertainments or habits without much interference. At our home, we know where things are. We know generally what to expect. We have things arranged the way we like, which brings us to another thing I separated out of its own aspect, is a sense of control. Is that it's not just stable, it's not just safe, it's not just comfortable, it's something we can make changes to according to our needs and desires. Out in the wide world, that's obviously not always true. Because there's all these other people with different needs and desires, and that constantly gets in the way. And the final aspect I'll mention here is what I labeled as activity. And it's kind of the home as a base for what we do. We may work outside the home, and most people do, but our ability to do so is influenced by the resources we draw from home, emotional and physical. Meals, sleeping, clothes, all that, all our stuff is there that we need to go about our lives. If our home is unsafe or uncomfortable or unstable, our ability to work is almost certainly going to suffer. And it's not just at our job, the way we deal with friends and other people, exercise hospitality, and offer assistance will often depend on the state of our home. Again, if our home is what we want it to be, it's a lot more likely we're going to be able to give, hospitality to that stranger they were talking about a few minutes ago. So those basic aspects in place. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different peoples in Lord of the Rings. And by peoples, I mean, you have elves and dwarves and imps and hobbits and men. You also have the enemies, but now I'll get to those. Because in different ways they reflect some of these different aspects. The elves are, of course, the eldest people of Middle-earth, and they were created first, or created and awakened first. I think the dwarves would have something to say about who got here first, but that's things for Tolkien nerds to argue about. Now, they originally inhabited the lands we know from the trilogy, as well as the lands east and south of that region. The Valar, who are the demigods or archangels of Tolkien's mythology, called them to the uttermost west, across the ocean, where they would dwell in a blessed realm. And not all answered the call. Some never responded. Some came only part way. And Legolas is a descendant of these elves that only came part way. They didn't actually sail over. And of course, some actually went the whole way and dwelt in the Blessed Land, Valinor. Now, eventually, some bad things happened, to say the least, and many elves ended up returning back across the ocean. And in fact, were forbidden to return because of sins committed along the way. If you want more information, go to the appendices in Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and all that. You'll get all the scoop on that. It is worth noting that in Lord of the Rings, Galadriel and Elrond were both descendants of these people who had crossed over and come back. When we enter the elves' home in the trilogy, Elrond at Rivendell and Galadriel in Lothlorien, they're very safe and secure, very stable. Elves live a long time, they're going to be stable. And once you're allowed in, the hospitality is flawless, but the careful watch is kept on each. The same is true of the Elf King's Mirkwood fortress in The Hobbit, where Legolas was born, though not during The Hobbit. For the elves in Rivendell and Lothlorien, these are ultimately homes in exile. The true homeland of these elves is in the west, beyond the ocean. So they are homes. They're homes that they have built with a sense of this is temporary. Someday we want to go back where, we want to get back to the Blessed Land. They never gave up the vision of their true home. And again, you start thinking about this, but that wasn't where they came from. They came from Middle-earth originally and went to Valinor. So, the whole idea of home is where you come from is a fungible concept. Going to the dwarves. Dwarves never experienced the uttermost west, and as far as I can recall, only one ever did. That was Gimli. And they don't look for an ultimate home. They are creatures of Middle-earth and make their home there. They settle in places where they can do their work, which is mainly mining and refining, making material goods. They dig deeper and build, now these dwarf holds are deeply rooted in place. And rather than migrating or spreading, they dig deeper and build stronger where they are. The driving element of the whole plot in The Hobbit is dwarves trying to get their stuff back from the dragon that stole it from them and drove them out of their house or out of their home in the mountain. In Lord of the Rings, you see the result of what can happen in Moria, which was the dwarven city. I mean, this is the big New York of dwarfhood. Well, they kept digging deeper and deeper and finally awakened the Balrog that then messed things up and the dwarves were driven out. But comments from Gimli, and if you know the backstory, there actually was an attempt shortly before the trilogy for the dwarves to get back and take Moria back, which failed miserably, of course. But again, dwarves never give up on this. This place is ours, even when they're faced with armies of goblins and monsters. But they're dominated, seems to be dominated by the ideas, as I said, of activity and place. And they certainly enjoy comfort and, good food and good beer, major values for dwarves. But their choice of living in caverns and tunnels doesn't appeal to a lot of other people. Addressing the Ents. Ents are also heavily into a sense of place, though in kind of a different way than the dwarves. They keep to themselves in Fangorn Forest, with Treebeard and all the rest in the trilogy. But it's not because they're attached to that particular location. It's a home defined by familiarity or nostalgia, you could say. They're described as shepherds of the trees. And Fangren Forest isn't a place they settled or built. It's a place that happens to be left to them. Well, the great wide forest that they used to know has disappeared. It's been harvested, or for whatever reason, they don't have this continent spanning forest that used to be in place, and this is where they kind of ended up, and they've been safe here, unmolested for a long time. And they're like, okay, well, it's what I know. It's, we like old forest, and we'll stay here. It's a sanctuary. And the ants basically watch the world go by as long as they're left to themselves. And it's only when people start messing with them and their trees that they rise up, and okay, then they take down Saruman's entire army. And speaking of people who like to be left to themselves, you have the hobbits. Now, unlike the ants, hobbits are a little more hospitable. They don't drive people away, and they don't want to just really be left alone. They're hospitable enough to visitors and travelers. But they just don't want these people to, intrude on their way of living, on their homes. And comfort is probably the primary theme of Hobbit homes. I mean, in the very first chapter of The Hobbit, one of the first lines you run into is, "It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort." I thought this was wonderfully portrayed, really, in both the trilogy and the Hobbit films. One of the few things the Hobbit films got right. Now, hobbits do have a distant memory of wandering, of some kind of nomadic existence, but that was a long time ago, and we don't live that way anymore. And they show no interest in expanding or moving anywhere else. They enjoy their gardens, again, which is stability and control. It is a garden, except it's a little area of growth that the gardener controls. They're not tied to their location by their work as much as, well, this is where we are, and this is my job that I happen to do, whether it's gardening or brewing or whatever. They're not as into isolation as the elves are. And again, they don't seem troubled by any vision of a better place or a distant place. The world around them is sufficient. And so hobbits don't need to change. They don't really like change for the most part. We want to be comfortable. Then there are the men of Middle-earth. Men are native to Middle-earth, and all the other free peoples are. And again, the interesting thing about the men we meet in Tolkien stories is that few of them live in their original homeland. Minas Tirith, the great fortress city that features in Return of the King, started as a colony of Numenor, which was a kingdom of men out in the sea, partway between Middle-earth and the uttermost west. Those who descend from Numenorians, such as Aragorn and Denethor, do not and cannot hope to return to their original kingdoms, since it sank under the sea. Nor are they permitted to sail to the uttermost west. Instead, they age and die as ordinary mortals. But again, they have built homes for themselves. One of the other primary group of men that we meet in the trilogy are the people of Rohan, the horse riders. And the interesting thing about them is, they think of this area as their home, but they've only been there a couple hundred years. They migrated to that place within what in Middle Earth is fairly recent history, driving out the locals. I mean, of all the people, the men are the most nomadic and the most willing to carve out a place for themselves and set themselves wherever they need to be. And then of the enemies, the orcs, the goblins, and trolls, they're artificial creations of Morgoth and Sauron, the semi-divine powers of darkness. As far as we can tell, trolls have nearly no concept of home. The trolls we see are either roaming bandits or soldiers at war. Goblins have homes and even cities, but those settlements were originally built by dwarves. The great city of the goblins, Mount Gunabad, was originally a dwarven city. Goblins and orcs delight a lot more in destruction than construction. Only under the direct control of Sauron did they build anything significant other than devices for war or for torturing prisoners. And what they build is not a home, but they built things like the Black Gate that stands at the entrance of Mordor. It's a fortification. This isn't a home. The only other things you see orcs living in that are like a home are really barracks. And even those were built by orcs. Saruman's orcs dwell in the fortress of Isengard, which was built by men, or in Minas Morgul, which was built by men and taken over. So they don't build. They don't have a sense of home. And from what we see of their discussions between themselves, they don't really have a sense of home. You know, we just don't see very much of it. But each of these peoples of Middle Earth emphasize different aspects of our idea of home. You know, the hobbits are about comfort, which we can certainly identify with. Dwarves live for their work and set up their homes accordingly. And how many of us are or have known people who moved because of their work? You know, they moved to a different city or to the other side of the city because their jobs are there. The Ents, of course, as I said, prize familiarity and stability, even if the horizon shrinks. And as I've grown older, I admit I can see the appeal better. It's like, I've done my things. I just want to be comfortable and not be bothered and do my little thing in my little house. And elves, they certainly make themselves homes of beauty and safety, even while they retain the memory of a blessed land to which they hope to return someday. And while the elves' hope of return to their true home would seem to echo a Christian's hope of heaven, we can really only find that blessed place in the afterlife. For men of Middle Earth, like men and women of modern Earth, are fated to die in what to the elves is a very short time, just a few dozen years. As Christians, it's an easy link from the elves' desire to return to a faraway blessed land. You compare that to heaven. However we define our home, be it comfort, safety, stability, activity, or specific place, we try to make our home fit our ideal home, even if we can't really define exactly what that ideal home looks like. Depending on wealth and a number of other factors, we may be able to come a long way towards establishing a real home. We may make ourselves more or less contented with the home we have at the moment. But there's always a deep awareness that there is something more, that there's a potential beyond what we see on Earth. The sheer variety and universality of religious impulse suggests that this awareness is inherent to human existence. Some major belief systems go so far as to dismiss everything in the physical world as ultimately an illusion, that there is no proper reality to what we normally see or hear. I'm sure you recall the childhood song that says, "Life is but a dream." Given the tale told in the book of Genesis and the event of the resurrections, Christians can't legitimately take that big a step. The good God created the world by his own will and pronounced it good. It got messed up in short order by the fall of the Garden of Eden, but creation retains the mark of the Creator's hand. And our own human flesh was additionally legitimized by the incarnation and resurrection of Christ. So we can acknowledge the fallen nature of the world and look forward, like elves do to the uttermost west, to a future fulfillment where all things are brought into alignment with God. There are many songs, like the one I started with, songs, stories, and jokes about going to heaven as a special place far away from our life on earth. But our journey to heaven is not like the elves sailing west from Middle Earth. In the standard frame of thought, going to heaven only happens after we die. In Tolkien's Middle Earth, the short lifespan of men was simply a mystery. There was no promise of heaven in those days. No, of course, there were speculations. Skipping off of Middle Earth for a few minutes, I managed to read Dante's Divine Comedy a few years ago. I had read much of it younger when I didn't know anything. And I managed to read it recently with the help of some commentary and a little more life experience. And so I know a few things. But it talks about an imaginary journey through hell, inferno, then purgatory, purgatorial, and finally into heaven, paradiso. It's fascinating work on many levels: poetic, personal, historical, and theological. Even where it's inaccurate historically or petty with personal issues, it illustrates certain truths about the human condition in relation to the divine. One of the things that struck me when I read it is that Purgatorio, the journey where the protagonist's sins are cleansed in various stages. He's ascending the mountain. He's come out of hell and is ascending through purgatory, and different sins are cleansed in different ways. It ends with the arrival at its highest point, the Garden of Eden. And this is, Eden is the Garden of Paradise, right? This is where we started. This is our home. This is where we came from, and to be restored to that, why isn't that the end? But heaven is an entirely different place in an entirely different volume of the Divine Comedy. One can debate the theological accuracy of the Divine Comedy. And the idea of purgatory itself can be debated, adapted, or dismissed depending on the theologian you listen to, or the church you belong to, or any of that. But what I want to deal with here is the image of the garden and the realization that the garden, the earthly paradise, is not the ultimate desire of our heart. It's not our ultimate home. The uttermost west is not the destination for men of Middle Earth, nor is it for modern women and men. The garden may be our home in a very important sense. It's not where we will stay. It is no longer the home which will fulfill all that we seek in the idea of home. We are meant for something better, something so much better that it could only be secured by the action of God himself, sending the Son to take on human flesh, taking on death and defeating it through the resurrection. All that said, I wonder about the motif of the journey to heaven. It certainly works as a metaphor, much like a life itself can be cast as a journey, even if we never go far from the place where we were born. But I've come to think of heaven not so much as a place, it's more of a presence. In Luke 17, Jesus says, "Nor will they say, 'See here,' or 'See there,' for indeed the kingdom of God is in your midst." Well, if heaven is in your midst, if it's not a specific place, then we don't need to physically travel anywhere to find it, either before we die or after we die. Stability, safety, comfort, activity, and even in some ways a sense of control, all those aspects of home that I mentioned earlier, are things that can never be perfectly realized in our fallen world. It's debatable whether they could be realized in an unfallen or restored world. but they can be realized in the presence of God, who is unchanging and eternal. In the God who is love and truth, we can find an infinite source of comfort, a guide and support for the work we ought to be doing, one who can control our environment and enable our ability to control not just our environment, but ourselves. So we look for home. We try to make our home match our ideal of home, according to our individual needs and desires. But we remain aware on some level that our best efforts have not attained the full potential of the idea of home. We imagine home or heaven as a perfect home according to our understanding of what that means, whether it's a stately mansion, an endless nature park, a haven, unintended, a haven we share with all our beloved pets. But ultimately, the perfect home is not a place, it is a person. It is by growing closer to that person that we draw closer to the ideal home we all seek. And perhaps, after all is said and done, home is not defined by where we are, but by who we are or what we are. As I begin this presentation, so I'll end with a song, so you get to put up with my voice again. This one is from 1982, just a few years after I became a Christian. The album is titled The Vigil by Temper Crab. And it made a lasting impression on me that few others have matched. This particular song is titled Realization. And it is actually, it's been a lasting inspiration for me personally, and a specific inspiration that sparked the idea of this talk in the first place. See if I can pull this off though. Father Adam, won't you see what you have done? You have given over your children to the fire and to the worm, and we're bleeding, we are needing, and it's a hard fate as we fall in our race. Cold wind from Eden blows across my face, and I'm yearning, oh, I'm burning to be back in the garden, back in the garden, back in the garden again. Second Adam, now I see what you have done. Through your dying, through your rising, you restored the fallen sun. Through your giving, we are living. And though I know you bruised your heel when you crushed the serpent's head, still you pulled the fangs out of our hearts, giving spirits life instead. And I'm learning, you're returning me back to the garden, back to the garden, back to the garden again. Of late I'm realizing that the garden I'm desiring is you. Thank you for your time and patience. I hope this essay finds a good home among you, provoking some thought and future discussion. Let's see, if I check time, it's 2:47, so we have scant minutes for some questions, answered questions, which I can pretend to answer. Comments? Yeah. Oh, he's gonna make you talk into a microphone.
You had mentioned that the forces of evil don't really create a home, but like a fortress or gate in the Lord of the Rings, like a dire architecture. And taking it even further, whenever you see a theme in the Lord of the Rings that wherever evil builds, it does so in a way that destroys the land, makes it barren, uninhabitable for most forms of life, and certainly unsustainable for future generations, even to the point where when you reclaim the land from evil, it takes a while for it to be able to be usable again, if ever. And whereas the forces of good, they live in harmony with the land, and they do so in a sustainable way, which I think I cannot help but seeing that Tolkien's commentary on modernity, because if you look at more traditional culture medieval culture and even up to modernity, there's more of a sense of living in harmony with nature so that you don't destroy the nature that you rely on in order to live. Whereas modernity often will just bulldoze and strip mine and just, and then make the land barren later.
It's interesting. Tolkien's view on industrialization versus agriculture and wildness is interesting. The phrase that comes to mind as you were talking is, sin ruins everything. And this is something that has been, in my mind for a long time. It's just how profound the fall at the Garden of Eden was, because it really did ruin everything. The earth that we are responsible for, our souls, it just, and the ramifications of all that. And one of the aspects of that is the willingness to destroy in the name of profit. Now, there is certainly, throughout history, there have been certainly plenty of instances and habits where, we're going to, just cut down all the trees because we need them. I mean, a lot of the forests that used to cover the British Isles were cleaned out by the end of the middle or end of the 19th century because they had to build all their ships. And by the time they realized that, we don't have enough trees, it was really too late. But things like that, have happened throughout the world, throughout history, because, again, we lose sight of the longer term of what is actually sustainable. Okay, I can get what I want right now. I'm not going to worry about, either the people 10 miles down the road or the people who are going to live, 10 years from now, because I get what I want. Yeah, that too. Somebody was already, We have one more here, please. Oh.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment, which actually you already covered, which is that we may have a sort of a romantic image of the way people used to live, where we lived in harmony with the land. Well, some places, some people maybe, but there are lots of historic devastations that we can't recover from. So it's sin. It's not just certain time periods in industrialization.
Yeah, honestly, the lesser impact that historical people seem to have on the environment is to a significant degree dependent on the fact that they just didn't have the tools to destroy things in the way we have today.
I love that I feel like you touched on it, and I just wanted to highlight one of the concepts that you said. There's probably some theological debate: is heaven our permanent home, or paradise earth, will earth be restored to the garden? But either way, the point of either of those scenarios is still the presence of God and our relationship with that. And I love C.S. Lewis. I felt like I heard hints of it, of The Great Divorce. And there's one of the characters that arrives in heaven and is so focused on meeting her son that she misses, and they keep telling her, like, that's not the point. Yeah, your son's here, but go further in, go farther up and further in, and head towards God. That unless you get that, even if you are there physically, you will choose to flee from it. You'll miss it. You'll go back to hell. And you can debate theological, if you take it too far, but that concept of the presence of God and the relationship being the factor, not the physical situation.
Yeah, and that's, again, that's one of the other things that sparked this talk was, okay, like I said, you always hear about going to heaven. Yeah, let's think about this, and let's think about, the theme of the conference is about home. And let's think about what do we mean when we say home? Because home means different things to different people, different focuses, foci, whatever the word is. And, taking a look at what, again, trying to nail down what those aspects are, and then looking at, okay, how does that relate to things we think about heaven? And using Lord of the Rings as a springboard, because you have these very distinct peoples with their very distinct cultures and experiences, and going, how do they illustrate these different ideas of what home is? So looks like we're okay. We have time, maybe one or two questions still. Okay. I guess that would be it. If anybody wants to chat, I'm happy to. So thank you very much.
Thank you.